Jim Parsons walked away from $50 million and the most successful sitcom of the 2010s, but it wasn't because of any single infamous scene. The real story behind why The Big Bang Theory ended after 12 seasons is far more human and heartbreaking than the clickbait headlines suggest. In the summer of 2018, while performing in The Boys in the Band on Broadway, Jim Parsons experienced what he would later describe as a perfect storm of personal trauma. The man who brought Sheldon Cooper to life for over a decade was about to tell Chuck Lorre and CBS that no amount of money could keep him playing the character that made him a household name. When The Big Bang Theory premiered in 2007, Jim Parsons was a relatively unknown actor who had auditioned for the pilot in 2006. The show would run for 12 years, making it one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history. Parsons' portrayal of the brilliant but socially awkward theoretical physicist Sheldon Cooper became the heart of the series, so much so that when he decided to leave, the entire show had to end. According to multiple sources close to the production, The Big Bang Theory simply couldn't continue without Sheldon Cooper. The entire premise, even the title itself, referenced Sheldon's work in theoretical physics. While ensemble comedies sometimes survive the departure of key cast members, this wasn't Friends or Cheers where the setting could carry on. This was Sheldon's story, and without Jim Parsons, there was no show. What makes Parsons' decision even more remarkable is what he was walking away from. CBS had offered him approximately $50 million for 2 additional seasons. That's more money than most actors see in their entire careers, offered for just 2 more years of work on a show that had already made him incredibly wealthy and famous. But by the summer of 2018, Jim Parsons was 46 years old, and he was thinking about his father, who had died at the age of 52. The math was simple and terrifying. If Parsons followed the same timeline as his father, he had just 6 years left to live. As he would later tell former Doctor Who actor David Tennant on his podcast in August 2020, "If you told me that, like my father, I had 6 years left to live, I think there's other things I need to try and do." The summer of 2018 became a convergence of traumatic events that would change Parsons' perspective on life and work. He was in New York, performing 8 shows a week in the revival of The Boys in the Band, a demanding theatrical production that required him to be at his emotional and physical peak every single night. But life, as it often does, had other plans. One of Parsons' dogs was dying. For anyone who's experienced the slow decline of a beloved pet, you know it's not just about losing an animal companion. It's about watching helplessness unfold in slow motion, about confronting mortality in its most intimate form. Parsons was emotionally wrecked during this period. He described walking his dog in the park before a commercial shoot and seeing how terrible the animal looked, barely holding himself together. Then, just days into his Broadway run, disaster struck again. During a performance of The Boys in the Band, Jim Parsons fractured his foot. For a stage actor in the middle of a demanding run, this wasn't just an injury, it was a potential career catastrophe. The fear wasn't just about physical pain, it was about letting down his castmates, the production, and himself. Parsons later described that moment as the scariest moment for the next couple of days because I didn't know. I felt like I was at the edge of a cliff, and I was teetering, and I saw something really dark below between the death of the dog, and I don't know what they would have done if I couldn't have gotten back on for the play. Picture this scene: Jim Parsons, one of television's biggest stars, hobbling through a Broadway theater on a fractured foot, emotionally devastated by his dying dog, performing a demanding play 8 times a week, while simultaneously being the face of one of the most successful sitcoms in television history. The pressure would have been unbearable for anyone, but it was in this crucible of stress, grief, and physical pain that Parsons experienced what he called a moment of clarity. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a single scene that broke him. It was the quiet realization that he had been speeding through life without really living it. As he put it, "I had this moment of clarity that I think you're very fortunate to get in a lot of ways, of going, don't keep speeding by, you know. Use this time to take a look around." When Parsons returned to Lowe's Angels after his Broadway run, he knew what he had to do. On a Sunday in August 2018, he went to Chuck Lorre's house. Lorre, the co-creator of The Big Bang Theory, was probably expecting to discuss scripts or storylines for the upcoming season. Instead, Jim Parsons sat down and told him he wouldn't be signing for seasons 13 and 14. What happened next reveals a lot about both men. Chuck Lorre didn't try to change Parsons' mind. He didn't throw more money at him. He didn't guilt him about the cast and crew who depended on the show. He just accepted it. This wasn't a negotiation or a business meeting. This was one human being recognizing another's need to choose his own path, even when that choice would cost everyone involved millions of dollars. But Parsons still had to tell his castmates, the people he'd worked with for over a decade, who had become his television family. A few days after his meeting with Chuck Lorre, following a table read, Parsons gathered Johnny Galecki, Kaylee Cuoco, Simon Helberg, Kunal Nayar, Mayim Bialik, and Melissa Roach in his dressing room and broke the news. Johnny Gailke would later admit feeling blindsided, but not in the way you might think. He wasn't surprised that Parsons wanted to leave. He was surprised that Jim had gone to Chuck Lorre first instead of discussing it with his castmates. It was a small hurt in the midst of a much larger loss. The feeling that after all these years, he wasn't part of Parsons' inner circle when it came to this life-changing decision. The cast's reaction reveals something important about the Big Bang Theory's success. This wasn't just a workplace for these actors, it was a genuine community. They had grown up together professionally, watched each other navigate fame, relationships, and the unique pressure of being part of a cultural phenomenon. Losing that would be devastating for all of them. Kevin Sussman, who played Stewart, offered an interesting perspective on Jim Parsons' work ethic that might explain some of the pressure he was feeling. According to Sussman, he would walk around with always a stack of index cards. I felt bad because everyone else is goofing around and having fun, and he was just studying. While his castmates were socializing and enjoying the experience, Parsons was constantly working, constantly preparing, constantly perfecting his craft. This dedication to excellence is admirable, but it also suggests a level of pressure and responsibility that Parsons placed on himself. He wasn't just phoning it in or coasting on the show's success. He was treating every episode, every scene, every line as if it mattered deeply to him. That kind of commitment over 12 years would be exhausting for anyone. The decision to end The Big Bang Theory sent shockwaves through the television industry. This was particularly surprising considering that just several weeks before Parsons made his announcement, CBS had reinforced their commitment to the show, indicating they were looking at another round of renewals. The ratings were still massive. The writers still had stories to tell, but as one source put it, the show ended because one actor, the heart of the show, simply said no. From a business perspective, Parsons' decision was almost incomprehensible. The Big Bang Theory was a money-printing machine for everyone involved. The show's success had made all the main cast members incredibly wealthy, and 2 more seasons would have added tens of millions more to everyone's bank accounts. But Parsons had reached a point where money wasn't the primary consideration anymore. His husband, Todd Spewak, was mentioned as a source of support during this difficult period. Having someone who understood the personal cost of fame and success must have been crucial in helping Parsons make this decision. It's one thing to walk away from $50 million when you're struggling financially. It's quite another when you're already wealthy beyond most people's dreams. The way the media initially covered Parsons' departure reveals something troubling about how we process celebrity decisions. The narrative became about finding the infamous scene or the dramatic moment that broke him. Headlines promised to reveal the shocking incident that drove television's highest-paid actor away from his golden goose. But real life isn't that simple or dramatic. The truth is messier and more human. Jim Parsons didn't quit because of a bad script or a difficult day on set. He didn't have a dramatic confrontation with producers or co-stars. He quit because he was a man in his mid-40s who was grieving his dying dog, nursing a fractured foot, exhausted from performing in a demanding Broadway play, and suddenly aware of his own mortality in a way that made him question how he wanted to spend whatever time he had left. When The Big Bang Theory aired its final episode in May 2019, it marked the end of an era in television. The show had been a constant in American culture for over a decade, comfort viewing for millions of fans who tuned in every week to watch Sheldon, Leonard, Penny, and the gang navigate love, friendship, and science in their own uniquely awkward way. But the story doesn't end there. In a fascinating twist that validates the show's enduring appeal, The Big Bang Theory became the most streamed show of 2024, 7 years after its finale. This achievement speaks to something powerful about the series and its characters. Even without new episodes, even without the marketing push that comes with active production, people are still drawn to these characters and their stories. Parsons himself has pursued a more diverse range of projects since leaving the show. In 2022, he starred in the film Spoiler Alert, and in 2024, he returned to his theatrical roots with stage productions of Mother Play and Our Town. These choices suggest a man who made the right decision for himself. Instead of collecting paychecks for playing the same character, he's challenging himself artistically and exploring different aspects of his craft. The irony is that by walking away from The Big Bang Theory, Jim Parsons may have preserved its legacy. Shows that run too long often diminish in quality, becoming shadows of their former selves. By ending when it did, The Big Bang Theory remains a complete story with a satisfying conclusion. The characters got proper send-offs, the storylines were resolved, and the show went out while it was still beloved rather than becoming something fans wished would just end. There's also something to be said for Parsons' courage in making this decision. In an industry where actors often cling to successful roles long past their expiration date, afraid to risk their financial security or relevance, Parsons chose personal fulfillment over financial gain. He chose uncertainty over comfort, artistic growth over guaranteed guaranteed success. The fact that Chuck Lorre didn't try to change Parsons' mind speaks to the respect and understanding between them. Lorre had worked with Parsons for over a decade, had watched him pour his heart and soul into the character of Sheldon Cooper, and when Parsons said he was done, Lorre recognized that this wasn't a negotiating tactic or a cry for attention. This was a human being at the end of his rope, making a decision about how to live his life. Looking back at the timeline, it's clear that the summer of 2018 was a perfect storm for Jim Parsons. The physical demands of Broadway, the emotional toll of his dog's illness, the fear and vulnerability of his foot injury, and the constant pressure of being the centerpiece of a cultural phenomenon, all combined to create a moment of clarity that changed everything. His words to Chuck Lorre and producer Steve Molaro reveal a man grappling with mortality in the most direct way possible. "If you told me that, like my father, I had 6 years left to live, I think there's other things I need to try and do." This wasn't about being ungrateful or difficult. This was about recognizing that life is finite and that spending it doing the same thing, even something successful and lucrative, might not be the best use of whatever time we have. The reaction of his castmates, particularly Johnny Gailke's feeling of being blindsided, shows how personal and painful this decision was for everyone involved. These weren't just coworkers, they were friends and colleagues who had shared one of the most successful runs in television history. Losing that family dynamic, that shared experience, would have been devastating for all of them. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Jim Parsons' decision is how it ultimately served everyone involved. The cast got to end the show on a high note, with their characters' stories properly concluded and their legacy intact. The writers got to craft a finale that felt earned and satisfying rather than forced or premature. The fans got closure rather than watching a beloved show slowly decline in quality. And Jim Parsons got something that $50 million couldn't buy: the freedom to choose how to spend his time, the opportunity to challenge himself artistically, and the peace of mind that comes from living according to his own values rather than external expectations. The Big Bang Theory's continued success in streaming proves that great television is timeless. Even years after its finale, people are still discovering or revisiting these characters and their stories. That's a testament not just to the quality of the show, but to the wisdom of ending it when the people involved were still passionate about the work, rather than just going through the motions. In the end, there was no infamous scene that made Jim Parsons quit the Big Bang Theory. There was just a man facing his own mortality and the reality of how he wanted to spend his remaining years, making one of the most difficult and courageous decisions of his career. He chose personal fulfillment over financial security, artistic growth over comfort, and his own well-being over external expectations. That's not infamous, that's inspiring. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most important decision you can make is knowing when to walk away, even from something that seems too good to give up. Jim Parsons didn't just quit a TV show, he chose to live his life on his own terms. In a world where that's increasingly rare, especially in Hollywood, his decision stands as a powerful example of what it means to prioritize what truly matters over what simply pays the most.